Om Namah Shivaya. So tonight we continue with the program, Living a Life That Matters, with Roshi Bernie Glassman and Roshi Eve Mionen Marco. Oh, the time went very fast. We reached the last session. It has been wonderful. Wish we had more sessions. But tonight is the last one. So I'd like to welcome again Roshi Bernie Glassman and Roshi Eve Mionen Marco. Let's welcome them.
So good evening. Again, this is our last evening, so we'd really like to give more of an opportunity for people to ask questions. So we're going to start with a few things, but if you have questions that are coming up for you, rather than waiting to the end, why don't you come to the mic?
And interrupt us.
Good luck interrupting Bernie. So just come to the mic, and so that we know that you have a question, and we'll really, we'll turn to your question as soon as possible, okay? And then we'd like to end it in a timely way so that we could ask again for questions at the end. But don't wait till the end, because the end tends to come sooner rather than later. Okay.
Okay.
So Bernie, how are you here?
It's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good.
So last night, you talked about having this experience, taking a vow to feed all the hungry spirits, really to bring everybody to awakening or to some experience of the oneness of life. Except that when it came to do that for people outside the Zendo, what you realized is that you didn't have the tools, it required a new venue, just required a whole new set of things, of skills. And then you talked about how the 3 tenets helped you do that, and all the people who worked with you. Now I remember that a lot of Buddhist teachers came through Greyston over the years, especially then when they totally disapproved of what you were doing. And they would come and they would sit with us, and we had a Zendo on the 3rd floor of a bakery, and it was nothing as beautiful as this. It was in the middle of a poor area, and there was an illegal paint factory across the street, and a butcher with the smell of all the meat hanging 2 houses down, and trucks coming up and down. And they just wondered what it was we were doing. And they would ask.
You left out the all-night whorehouse next door.
It wasn't a whorehouse, it was a bar.
It was an all-night whorehouse.
Yeah, what was her name?
Little Bit.
Little Bit's place.
Was the
That's
madam.
right.
She ran it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, and also the crack epidemic was then at its height, so there were all these red needles all around every morning. And that house, the crack house, was right behind us, if you remember. So the point is, people would come and say, what are you doing? If your job is to bring people to an experience of enlightenment, why are you doing this? And more specifically, how does giving people homes, jobs, child care, medical care if they have HIV, housing if they have HIV, and all the things, how does that really bring people to an experience of the oneness of life? Is it that anybody, there are a lot of social agencies that build homes for people without homes. Do those people necessarily get an experience of the oneness of life?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, we rehearsed this before, but it's a good question. And there's 2 points here, 2 different things happening. One, if you use these 3 tenets and say that I want to do work with the homeless, and now using the 3 tenets, go to an area where there are homeless. Try to go without any ideas of what homeless people are or aren't. Bear witness to that and do the actions that come out of it. If you do that, the actions might be building housing. The actions might be creating jobs. The actions might be giving somebody a quarter or $1. The actions might be saying, "How you doing, man? What's up with you?" The actions will arise. Those actions that arise aren't necessarily going to help the people that are affected by those actions awaken to the oneness of life. They're the actions that will arise out of your bearing witness, your bearing witness, connecting with those folks, and then some actions are going to arise. Another case is that I had made my life, my vow of my life was to help people experience the oneness of life. So when I started to bear witness to, say, the homeless, what came out of that was, how do I build a container, an environment which will satisfy the needs, but more than that, be an environment in which the ability or the chance of experiencing the oneness of life will be part of that environment. And that became the grace in mandala. And so it's different. That container called the grace in mandala, which created housing and which created jobs and whatever, had as its in its structure, and that's what I was trying to do, that to have it in its structure, the people that came into that somehow would start experiencing the interconnectedness of life. And I'll give a concrete example, because it's so it was very different than the kind of structure we had in our Zen center. It was very different. But you see the difference between, say, somebody that's bearing witness to homelessness and actions that might come out of it, might be all kinds of different actions. I was bearing witness not just to the homeless, but I was trying to bear witness to what would help the people that I wanted to serve experience the oneness of life. And I'm happy to say that after 30 years, I think it's worked. I mean, it's taken less than 30 years, but it's still, the structure is still there, And it is helping that to happen in very strange ways, maybe. Because the people we were dealing with, um, I don't know if they were spiritual or not. I can't judge that. Most of them were not going to any kind of spiritual plays. Um, in fact, they were mostly concerned with just themselves and where to get the next hit, where to get the next drugs. Many of them had families, but they didn't take care of their spouses or their kids. Uh, it was far from being connected. And we did little things. So let's take the bakery, for example. The bakery now has about 100 people working, and I'd say about 90 came right out of the streets. When we started enlarging the bakery to include people from the streets, we probably had about 40, 50, and it's grown over the years. And the money that bakery makes goes to help the other entities, child care and different things. But let's say there's 90 people in the production area, and at this point, what we make the most of, just so you know, is the chocolate brownies that go into Ben & Jerry chocolate, fudge brownie ice cream and yogurt. We make all of those brownies. And that happened because Ben & Jerry and I walked around a lake 20 years ago saying, how can we work together to help do this kind of work? The first year we made about $800,000 of brownies in a year, and now we're making about 12 million in a year. It's about 35,000 pounds of brownies a day. A lot of brownies. So we have about 90 people making those, and they're divided into teams of 10. And remember, these are people that got their jobs by coming to the door. And when we have openings, we took the first one. And so now there's a waiting list. We have 100 working, with a waiting list of about 200. And while they're waiting, we also are training them in how to work so they could get other jobs in the area. We do job training for them. Just a sidelight, there was a young man, a beautiful young man, who just was on the TED program. He talked. He's working now 4 years. He's a supervisor at the bakery. And 4 years ago, before 4 years ago, he was a big drug dealer, making a lot of money. And then he decided, he got married, he had family, and he didn't want to do that anymore. He served some time, was in prison, and he wanted a different life, but he couldn't get a job. He went from place to place to place to place, and of course they wanted him to write his resume, and have you been in prison was a question, and that meant he didn't get a job. So he couldn't get a job. But he had put his name on the Grayson list, and about 2 days before he was going to go back into the street selling drugs, he got a call from Grayson with a job offer. So he's now been there 4 years. He's a supervisor, and he's got a beautiful story, and he's been on TED recently talking about how his life was saved and how this has to happen more around the country because there are thousands and thousands and millions of people like him, and how he feels connected to all of those people. How did that happen? Well, at any rate, so we have teams of 10, and somebody gets a job, maybe him 4 years ago, and he gets put into a team. The team, everybody in that team makes a certain amount of money, and that depends on how long they've been there, many things, how they're doing, whatever. They make different amounts of money, each person. But above their regular salary, they get a percentage of the money that is made by them producing more than a certain amount. So if they produce more than a certain amount, they share in that profit. So this new guy comes into the team. Everybody wants to train him. A week before, the guy came in, and a week before they came in, they never thought about the next person. And now they want to train him because they're going to make more money if he does well. And if he doesn't do well, they're going to make less money. And if he really, if they know him, they're all from the hood, the neighborhood, they know each other. If he's there just to get enough money to get his next hit, his next amount of drugs, they know that, and they're going to get rid of him. So it's not that we just take anybody in and they're there forever. They got to work, and they got to satisfy their peers. In the midst of all of this, they're learning that being connected means that they will do better, that life will be better for them. It's one little technique, nothing that I learned from the Zendo, but a little technique to help people understand or experience the value of interconnectedness. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you remember, when we worked on with the folks to come up with, they came up with vision, mission of Grayson, of what they felt it was, but also what they felt the spirituality was. They came up with the same tenets, basically the same tenets as the Zen peacemakers. So at any rate, there's two different aspects. One, as a teacher in Zen, and probably a teacher in most spirituality, our vow is to help people experience the oneness of life. The upayas, or the methods we have, we learn from tradition and whatever, and then going into these other arenas, like the business world or whatever, certainly meditation helps in all those, and yoga helps in all those, but are there any other ways to help bring that experience of oneness to the folks? So that when I go and bear witness, it's to that. And the people that I have spoken to about, or the people, there are a lot of people now that are doing within the Zen peacemakers and others all around, and many spiritual that are doing spiritually engaged social action. There, it's bearing witness on the thing they want to work with. So there's a young woman here, I'm not sure what age, but in relation to me, she's young, who said she's working with prisoners. So one can bear witness to the prisoners, again, using these three tenets, and do the actions that arise out of that. And that would be perhaps different, most likely different than what you would do working with prisoners if you just did it out of a book. But if you are also trying to bear witness to the prisoners and say, how can I help them experience the oneness of life? That's a different story. Both, I think, are extremely valuable. And the second one sort of puts you into the realm of being a teacher.
That's what Fleet Mall did, who's one of your successors, and he's a big prison activist, and he had been in prison for 15 years for drug offenses. And so he also wanted to do something at that time. So his way of doing that, and he had some strong Tibetan training, his way of doing that was to actually create the first hospice in prison that was staffed by inmates. They had very few hospices in prisons then, but they were all staffed by outsiders, volunteers who would come in. But his idea was to train the inmates to be hospice volunteers. And this way, they start taking responsibility for each other and bearing witness to, the dying among themselves, their own friends, their own people. Because dying in prison, from what I understand from him, inmates could live with a lot of things, but the worst thing that could happen to you is that you die in prison. That's just the worst thing that could happen. That's like the end of all hope. And he really wanted to help them, but his way of doing that was to train other inmates to then take care of each other, which also does the same thing. It helps them experience the oneness of life.